Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. I have now returned from my week in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Had a fantastic time. Got to meet a whole bunch of people. Between the two meetups, we had something like 60 people show up, so that was really, really cool. And I learned a lot about Ireland, about its people, about its history, but I also recognize that there's a lot I don't know. And with that in mind, there was a channel that was recommended by a number of the people that I met while I was there, and it's called John D. Ruddy. He's in Ireland, and he seems to make a lot of videos about Irish history. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at one of his videos, which I will link down in the description so you can check out his entire content collection on Irish history. This is the Irish Civil War in 14 minutes. Now, I am going to say up front, this is not a topic I know a ton about. I know the basics. I know kind of the major players involved. If you've ever seen the movie Michael Collins starring Liam Neeson, he plays Michael Collins, and that centers around a lot of the events, beginning with the Easter Rising, which we have talked about in 1916, which eventually leads to the events of the Irish Civil War. So I'll offer what feedback I can, but mostly I'm here to learn, and I invite you to learn with me as we dive into this one. Let's check it out.
Mannyman Does History. This video was sponsored by NordVPN. In the early 1920s, the Irish Republican Army fought a fierce war against the British. The IRA used guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics. The British used brute force. They had fought to a stalemate, and in 1921, the British called for a truce, not knowing how close the IRA was to surrendering after...
And you know, that happens a lot. And first of all, to give a little background, I don't know if he's going to give background or not here. It doesn't look like it. I guess we're going to dive right in. And this is always the trouble that you face when telling any story, is where do you start? Because knowing that all history is connected, anywhere we start is going to feel like it leaves something else out. So I'll put a link I'll pin down in the pinned comments. So it'll be right at the top of the comment section to my series that I did looking at extra histories, story of the 1916 Easter Rising, which is kind of the immediate predecessor to all of these events, right? We know that the British have occupied Ireland in one form or another for hundreds of years. You've got invasion after invasion happening. It's eventually under the Tudors that Ireland is really completely subjugated by the British and by the English, but also Scottish. And it's a long, complicated story that we won't get into all of now, but by 1916, with the First World War raging in France and on the Western Front for the British, people of Ireland, people who support a free, independent Ireland, see their chance. And you have the Easter Rising, which gets brutally put down. And on the same side in that Easter Rising are these two prominent figures that are going to rise in the Civil War, which is Eamon de Valera and Michael Collins. And they're on the same side in that Easter Rising. Both of them are spared the executions that happened to a lot of other guys. And if you go to Dublin, all the prominent train stations in Dublin are named after some of these men who were executed after the Easter Rising. But as we've often talked about, when you are on the same side fighting for the same goal, once you achieve that goal, there's often a difference of opinion about where you go moving forward. And that's what's going to happen here, is that at least the initial goals, the initial steps toward complete independence for Ireland are going to happen in those years after the Easter Rising. But then De Valera and Collins are going to find themselves on opposite sides of what it looks like moving forward.
Years of fighting. During the War of Independence, the Unionists in the North had made it clear that they wanted no part in an independent Ireland.
And why is that? Well, it goes back again to hundreds of years earlier, where you have the Ulster Plantation. So Ireland is divided up into these different realms that had been separate kingdoms hundreds of years earlier. You have Ulster in the north, you have Connacht, Munster, and Leinster. I know it's spelled M-E-A-T-H, but they told me it's kind of Mead is how it's pronounced. I'm still working on my Irish pronunciation, so bear with me. Took me a while just to get Glendalough down, which is one of the places I went to, but I'm getting there, my Irish friends. I will get there. Ulster in the north is heavily settled by what we in America refer to as Scots-Irish, or is often referred to as Ulster Scots. These are Protestants who settle in the north to turn that part of Ireland into a Protestant place. And so they're culturally British very much. You see that to this day. Belfast is a very different city than Dublin. And they're religiously Protestant, whereas much of the south is Catholic.
And so the state of Northern Ireland was created for them and remained part of the United Kingdom. Republic President Eamon de Valera spent the summer arguing with British Prime Minister David Lloyd George over whether Dev would be recognised as the leader of a sovereign state in the negotiations. Dev didn't get his way.
And De Valera, by the way, was born in the United States, and they allude to that in the movie Michael Collins. De Valera is played by the phenomenal, wonderful actor, the late Alan Rickman. He was born in the United States, and he speculates in that movie, and I don't know how true it is, that being American-born and being an American citizen then is part of what spares his life during the executions.
So Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith, among others, were sent over to negotiate with Britain. A fully independent Irish Republic or a 32-county United Ireland was never on offer from the British.
Right.
The negotiations in London resulted in the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which created the 26-county Irish Free State, which would become a dominion of the British Empire.
And yeah, we don't talk about this, right? So
26-county
let's pause
Irish
it on
Free
that map
State,
for a second.
which would become a dominion of...
So Canada, to this day, present day, the head of state of Canada is King Charles III. But it's not a dominion anymore. It's part of the Commonwealth of Nations. But there were these dominions at that time, which were they had their own parliament, and they could kind of make their own decisions, but they were still under the ultimate authority of the monarch. Of course, Newfoundland was a separate dominion. It wasn't part of Canada. And that was initially what Ireland was going to be, was, okay, you can kind of have your freedom. You're still part of the British Empire, like India, like Canada, like South Africa and Kenya and other places, Jamaica, Belize. But you'll at least be able to sell this back home as independence. And part of what I've read about all this is that there are some who feel that Eamon de Valera sent Michael Collins to do this, knowing that that was what they were going to get, and knowing that he'd be able to pin the blame for not getting complete Irish independence and a complete republic, pin it on Michael Collins, which is kind of what happens.
Of the British Empire, like Canada or Australia. The English king would still be head of state,
George
and
V.
the Irish government would have to pledge an oath of allegiance to the crown. 3 strategic...
And that's a key right there, right? You know, it's one thing to say, okay, you're a dominion, but to require these people, okay, you're going to get your independence, but I need you to swear an oath of allegiance to King George V. And that, for a lot of these men and women, many women as well, who had been fighting hard for Irish independence, that was a bridge too far for them.
Ports were also held onto by Britain for defence purposes. The treaty also allowed Northern Ireland to opt out of joining the Free State, thus cementing partition on the island.
I wonder if that border will cause a problem in the future. And, you know, it's interesting, and I'm getting way ahead of the video here, and I'm going to try to let more of it play so we can learn. In talking to people in Ireland, at least the ones that I met in Northern Ireland and in Ireland, in the aftermath of the Troubles in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, with the Good Friday Agreement, I asked them, I'm like, well, what do you guys think about the idea of a united Ireland? And the general consensus from everybody I talked to was, well, you know what, we're good with the Good Friday Agreement. We like it. It works. And basically the Good Friday Agreement says that the only way a united Ireland would ever happen is if the people in the north decide that's what they want. And if they don't, that's fine. And if they do, great. But we're not going to, like, here in the Republic of Ireland, push for that. And so that's kind of what was happening here, too.
It was signed in December, and Collins and Griffith brought it back to Dublin to a mixed response, to say the very least. The treaty was debated in the Dáil, and people were divided. The likes of De Valera and Cathal Brugha were against the treaty, believing it to be a betrayal of the Republic. Collins argued that the Free State would be a stepping stone towards complete independence, the freedom to achieve freedom.
Yeah, and so put yourself in their position. What do? Do you fight for complete independence and you keep fighting and maybe this bloody this bloody war for independence against the British continues, and now the British aren't distracted by a war on the continent anymore. They can give their full attention to you, and they can crush this, and a lot more Irishmen are going to die. Or do you say, you know what, we've fought, we've bled, we did achieve something significant here, and down the road there will be another opportunity for us to push to get complete independence, complete sovereignty. Where would you stand on something like that?
Also, a renewed war with Britain was not desirable.
Yeah.
Ultimately, in January 1922, the Dáil voted in favour of the treaty.
So
64
close.
votes to 57. Dev and his supporters left Dáil Éireann in protest. Arthur Griffith was elected the new president in Dev's absence. Because the treaty had to be ratified by the British Parliament of Southern Ireland, the pro-treaty TDs met with their fellow Unionist MPs in the Mansion House.
Yeah, TD is what they call, so in England, in Britain, you have MPs, members of Parliament. TD is what they call them. And actually, they're having elections right now in about a week and a half for their TDs.
Thus forming the provisional government of the Irish Free State, with Michael Collins as chairman. Dublin Castle and many other places of British authority surrendered to the Free State. Up north, sectarian violence in Belfast continued, and membership of the IRA increased there significantly. Tyrone and Fermanagh county councils pledged their allegiance to Dáil Éireann, but James Craig, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, had them shut down by the police of the RIC. Collins assured the IRA in the north that partition would only be a temporary measure. Down south, the IRA was deeply divided about the treaty. The pro-treaty IRA were reorganised into the Irish National Army. Anti-treaty IRA members began capturing RIC barracks as British troops were abandoning them.
So now you've gone from the people of Ireland fighting a war against the British to now the people of Ireland fighting against other people of Ireland. And the pro-treaty side are actually going to get help from the British, the same British they had once been fighting with, in order to be able to win and support their treaty.
In March, things almost came to blows in Limerick as anti- and pro-treaty forces argued over taking control of new barracks, known today as Sarsfield Barracks. Dev travelled around Munster speaking out against the treaty, telling people they would have to wade through Irish blood, through the blood of the soldiers of the Irish government, and through, perhaps, the blood of some of the members of the government in order to get Irish freedom. Thems were fighting words, and IRA forces met to officially reject the treaty and formed their own army executive of 16 men. In April 1922, they led 200 anti-treaty IRA to occupy the forecourts in Dublin, hoping for a British response and a renewal of hostilities with the British. The next month, anti-treaty forces captured Kilkenny.
I was in Kilkenny, nice little town. It's got a castle there, and it's a Norman castle. It's got one side that's completely missing. I think that goes back to Oliver Cromwell in the 1600s.
Violence broke out, but an uneasy truce was held in the Dáil as the election approached. The leaders of the divided Sinn Féin party agreed that they wouldn't split the vote, so both anti- and pro-treaty sides agreed to form a coalition government.
It's amazing that you have division upon division upon division. You have division of pro versus anti-treaty, but then within different parties you have pro-treaty and anti-treaty. So there's so much. I mean, I just can't imagine being in Ireland during this time. The people who lived through the famine in the 1840s and early 50s, see the population just slashed beyond belief. Many emigrations, people going to other countries, the United States and a lot of other places. A couple generations later now, you have these civil wars happening. It's a brutal time to be alive.
Whatever the outcome, the election came and the pro-treaty Sinn Féin won more than the anti-treaty Sinn Féin. Most of the other parties were also pro-treaty. Tensions were running high. The British were putting pressure on Collins to quell the rebellion before it started. Winston Churchill threatened to send British troops back over to sort out the rowdy rebels. But Collins decided he would do it himself. On the 28th of June, Collins had the Free State Army point 2 British 18-pounder field guns at the forecourts and opened fire, and thus began the Irish Civil War. It was no longer the Irish fighting the British. It was former comrades, former brothers and sisters in arms, fighting against each other. The Battle of Dublin lasted 6 days. It was like the Easter Rising all over again, except this time it was the Free State forces wielding the weapons of the British Empire.
Some of the same people who had been on the receiving end in Dublin fighting are now doing that to others. It reminds me a little bit of, for American audience, in the aftermath of the American Revolution, the United States had become independent and had fought against what it saw as tyranny by the British government, in particular over things like taxes. But now you've got George Washington in the field at the head of an army marching towards southwestern Pennsylvania because of the Whiskey Rebellion, which was over taxes. The same thing on the opposite side.
Anti-treaty forces were herded towards the top of Sackville Street. Some escaped the city as Cathal Brugha stayed behind, revolver in hand, to stand off against the Free State. He was shot and later died. The Free State were now in control of the capital. There was a mad scramble for control across the country between Free Staters and Republicans. When the IRA split, there were more for the Republicans. They also had the more experienced guerrilla fighters, but lacked the decent weaponry. Frank Aiken, leader of the Northern IRA, said they would remain neutral, seeing the social divides at first hand. Aiken would later be arrested.
So there's been a number of bloody Sundays throughout history, and there was one where you have them opening fire at I think it was a rugby match, just indiscriminately cutting down civilians, and those kinds of things tend to push people off of the fence. A lot of people might find themselves caught in the middle, not wanting to get involved, but then one side or the other commits an atrocity or cracks down too hard, and pretty soon you create enemies where before you didn't have them.
And taken to Dundalk prison. Liam Lynch had been captured in the forecourts, but was allowed to leave the city to convince his fellow Republicans to stand down. Instead, he became the IRA Chief of Staff and organised the fortification of his home city of Limerick. They strengthened their positions mainly in the south, nicknamed the Munster Republic. Due to the limited weapons, Liam Lynch chose the defensive stance and let the Free State Army come to them. Free State forces captured towns throughout Leinster and even managed to capture Galway with little resistance. Led by Owen O'Duffy, Free State forces captured Limerick after a week of fighting. The same day, Waterford fell to the Free State. The anti-treaty forces were no match for the Free State's artillery.
Not when you have the weapons and the backing of the British government.
To avoid capture, the Republican fighters abandoned their positions in Limerick and regrouped near Kilmallock. A harsh battle was fought as Free State forces approached, Republican forces using ambushes and 3 armoured cars to hamper the inexperienced Free State soldiers' advance. But they could not hold back the tide as more and more Free State reinforcements arrived. Free State forces were able to mobilise by sea as they landed in Westport. In Dundalk, IRA forces blew a hole in the wall of the prison, freeing Frank Aiken and other Republican prisoners. In Skerries, County Dublin, Harry Boland, right-hand man of De Valera and former best friend of Michael Collins, was shot dead while being arrested in a hotel.
And they show kind of a fictionalized version of Harry Boland's death in Michael Collins. And fascinating thing, all of these figures are buried in the Glasnevin Cemetery. There's 1.5 million people buried in the cemetery, and I did a video there, which I will be putting up here at some point. Fascinating. Michael Collins is there, Eamon de Valera is there, Harry Boland is there. Hundreds of people from things like the Easter Rising and the Civil War and its aftermath are all buried there.
Free State forces landed by sea in Fennet, County Kerry, and later in Youghal and Passage West, just outside of Cork City. The Free State were tightening their grip from multiple angles. A massive portion of the Dublin IRA were captured after their plan to blow up the bridges leading into Dublin was foiled. The anti-treaty forces seemed as if they were being routed very quickly around the country. Liam Lynch ordered all IRA forces to go back to the old guerrilla warfare. They could no longer fight the Free State head-on. Things
Yeah, and this is something that throughout history, smaller, weaker, less powerful forces have done against larger ones. It's a pretty common tactic.
were looking good for the Free State. In August, Arthur Griffith, president of the Free State, dropped dead of a brain hemorrhage in Dublin. William T. Cosgrave became the new president. Frank Aiken led an attack on the barracks in Dundalk, releasing 240 prisoners and capturing 400 badly needed rifles. Forces near Northern Ireland were able to use the border to escape where the Free State forces couldn't follow. Commander-in-Chief Michael Collins decided to travel down to his home county of Cork and try and make contact with anti-treaty forces and sue for peace. While passing through Bailnamla in West Cork, Collins was caught in an ambush.
So my understanding is what happened was they passed through. Someone from the other side recognized that Michael Collins was there, and they set up an ambush for when they made the return trip through that same area. And that was when Collins was killed.
And shot dead. His state funeral temporarily brought the warring factions together in mourning.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. This is like one of your heroes from a few years earlier. And no matter which side of this conflict you were on, these were people who looked up to and many times fought alongside Michael Collins in the Easter Rising. And now he's dead, killed by fellow Irishmen. Hopefully, you would think that this would kind of bring things to a close and get everyone to realize, hey, we were really going too far with this.
But it was not to last. Collins had been the closest link between the two sides,
Yeah.
wanting to bring about peace and forgiveness and get on with running the country. But with him and Griffith gone, the Free State leadership grew bitter towards the Republicans, who simply refused to surrender. Things once again descended into attack and reprisals, sometimes brother fighting brother. In September, members of Dáil Éireann took their seats in their new home of Leinster House, where it continues today. Spoilers. They passed the Public Safety Bill, which allowed
Beautiful building, too, especially at night. Looks really cool.
the
And it's pretty much almost like right across the street from where the Duke of Wellington was born, which is kind of awesome.
National Army to run military courts or execute men bearing arms against the state. Most of the Women's Council, Cumann na mBan, had chosen to fight against the treaty, believing a republic to be the best vehicle for women's rights.
Yeah, and women had, like I said, a prominent role in all of this. Even before this, the first woman ever elected to the Parliament, the British Parliament in Westminster, was a woman who was from Ireland. I don't think she took her seat because for various reasons, but we also visited her grave. Countess she was, and she's buried there among all of those heroes of Ireland in Glasnevin Cemetery. And then you had a woman who was the Minister for Labour for Ireland.
They had already come far in the last 8 years. There were women judges in the Dáil courts, and the 1921 election had seen 6
There she is, Constance Markovitch. She was actually a Countess Markovitch.
women elected as TDs. Cumann na mBan led their own attacks against the Free State and were particularly useful to the IRA for gathering information from Free State sources. They had their methods. Cumann na mBan ran creches in Dublin to allow mothers to continue the fight during the day. The Free State outlawed the organisation in October, and the Catholic Church and media began speaking out against these upstart women. In November, the Free State began executing IRA prisoners. The IRA declared they would assassinate every TD who voted for the Public Safety Bill and started...
So it's just escalating. The atrocities are getting built up on either side. There's a lot more frustration and anger and bitterness toward one another. It went from being kind of reluctant enemies who had both wanted the same thing but in different ways to where now it's just bitter.
with Sean Hales. TD Pádraig O'Malley was also wounded in the attack. In retaliation, the Free State executed Rory O'Connor, Liam Mellows, Joe McKelvey and Richard Barrett, all of whom had been imprisoned since the taking of the Four Courts. As 1923 began, the Republican guerrilla war continued, burning homes of TDs, burning old big houses of the Anglo-Irish families, the former Protestant ruling class. Grudges were settled. Revenge was taken. Prisoners of the IRA were taken out to the middle of nowhere to be executed, and as this continued, the Free State continued to execute IRA prisoners. Wow. Alongside this and the depleting weapons, the Republican fight was waning. Public support was shrinking. The Catholic Church had stopped administering the sacraments to known IRA members,
Wow.
and the power of Catholic guilt is not to be underestimated. De Valera wanted a ceasefire, but had no control over the IRA. In April, the Free State killed Liam Lynch and captured many of the IRA executive in the Knockmeal Down Mountains in County Waterford. Frank Aiken, who had already been recaptured, became the new IRA Chief of Staff, and at the end of the month called a ceasefire. He ordered all IRA members to dump their arms and stop fighting. Dev sent out a message to the troops. Military victory must be allowed to rest for the moment with those who have destroyed the Republic. The Free State were victorious. The costs of the years of war had been high. Because the war had ended, 13,000 Republican prisoners who'd been arrested in wartime under emergency powers could now be released, but the Free State held on to them and rounded up more prisoners just in case. William Cosgrave reorganised the pro-treaty Sinn Féin into a new party, Cumann na nGaedheal, and were in government for the rest of the decade. The police force was reorganised into the unarmed Garda Síochána. The IRA prisoners were...
And yeah, when you see the police there now, it says Garda. That's the same force. It's pretty neat to kind of see these connections.
Eventually released in 1924, after many protests and hunger strikes.
And hunger strikes, again, these are common themes that you see later on in the Troubles in the 1970s. So many parallels between what was happening in the 1920s and what you'll see later in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Organised his Republicans into the political party Fianna Fáil to oppose Cumann na nGaedheal. Fianna Fáil would later come to power in 1932 with a tense but thankfully peaceful and democratic transfer of power. Cumann na nGaedheal would evolve into Fine Gael in 1933.
And those are kind of the two parties I saw everywhere on the posters for people running for TD.
And openly flirted with fascism. Yep. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would go on to dominate Irish politics to this day, being two sides of the same coin, power passing back and forth between them. Dev spent the 1930s dismantling the Free State from within, which is exactly what Michael Collins had.
I was just about to say, that was what Michael Collins told you could happen, is that this is a stepping stone, that this will get us to where we want to go. And he was absolutely right in the end.
Suggesting before the Civil War... Ultimately, he was able to end the Free State and create a new constitution and established the newly independent Ireland, or Éire in Irish, in 1937. Ireland later officially became a republic in 1949.
And this is in that time when you have India getting its independence and Canada becoming completely separate and not just a dominion of the British Empire.
Northern Ireland would remain a part of the United Kingdom, and the sectarian divides between Protestants and Catholics would erupt into decades of violence known as the Troubles. But thankfully, since the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, it has experienced relative peace.
And like I said, obviously the groups of guys and girls that I talk to don't represent everyone. But the sense I got from people in Belfast and also people in Dublin, and those folks had come from all over the place, not just those cities, was that they were pretty content with the Good Friday Agreement and the way it laid things out and what it meant for the future. And there didn't seem to be a lot of desire to ever revisit that. So hopefully that's the case.
A new version of Sinn Féin emerged during the Troubles. The border remains a central question around Brexit as the UK leaves the European Union. Watch this space. Civil War politics, voting between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, still seems to dominate Irish politics. But we'll see. At least they're not shooting each other. Thanks for watching, folks.
All right, that was really good. I enjoyed that. He's got a very unique style. Obviously, it looks like he drew everything himself, which is cool. So talent there. I learned some things I didn't know. A little bit better understanding of kind of the basics of this. Obviously, any story like this is super complicated, and I'm sure there are things that got oversimplified and all of that. So especially our Irish friends, but anybody who knows a lot about this part of history, add to the conversation. I do read every comment, so I'm looking forward to learning more from all of you. And if there's another one of his videos that you'd like me to take a look at, let me know. Like I said, check out the link in the description or the pinned comment for the series on the Easter Rising that we did a while back. Thanks for watching.